Hello and welcome to the Alpha Software Demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I'm coming back after a terrific week last week where we had our Alpha Anywhere or Alpha Software Developers Day for 2023. I know a bunch of you here today on this call were able to attend, but for those of you who weren't, the recordings for those sessions, even for those of you who were, the recordings for those sessions are now available. You can find that on our website, alphasoftware.com/devday2023-content-portal. And we're going to be talking about one of the topics that was brought up at the Developer Day today. But before we go any further, just want to make sure that I am coming through. So if people let me know if you could see my screen and you can hear my voice, either in the questions or the contents or the chat window. Perfect. All right, so the address, let me grab that address. Hang on a second, and I will, I'll put that right into the address bar. Hold on a moment. I'll do that for you. Right. Grabbing content portal page. Content portal. Okay, grab that URL, copy, and I'm going to paste that into the chat window right now. So there you go. One of the sessions that we had, let me go ahead and resume my screen. The first session that we had was with Selwyn Ravens. Selwyn is our co-founder and president of Alpha Software, and he went through the key features that were added to Alpha Anywhere over the past year, as well as some of the new ones that are on the horizon. Now, as he ended his presentation, Bob Moore, VP of Mobility, stepped in to talk a little bit more about a concept called progressive web applications. And I know it was of huge interest 2 years ago when Bob did this presentation. We hadn't really shown a lot about it until our last conference. But in fact, a bunch of stuff has been added to Alpha Anywhere to support progressive web applications. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So if you saw Bob's presentation last week and you had never known anything about progressive web applications, you may have felt yourself a bit lost. So today we're going to be doing one of, I hope, a series of PWA webinars, but this one is going to be for newbies. So we're going to start right at the beginning and sort of explain what a progressive app really is, why you would want one, and how you can make one. And then once you've got that under your belt and you kind of understand that, I think, and you go and watch Bob's presentation, it's going to make a heck of a lot more sense. So let's get started. All right, so I am going to move on to my next screen. Let's start with the definition of a progressive web app. This is one that I stole from Wikipedia. So a progressive web app is a type of application delivered through the web, built using common web technologies, including HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and WebAssembly. Let's take a look at that word delivered, because often you'll think of a web app as simply a website that's interactive. Maybe your bank has got an online banking, you log into the site and you use their website there, and that is just simply a web app. A progressive web app is different because the application isn't one that you're interacting through on their site exactly. In fact, you're interacting with it locally on your own device. That's right, the app itself is delivered to your device. And that means, as a result, it can be installed as an icon on a home screen or in your start menu on a computer. It still has access or potential access to hardware on your device. So using things called WebAssemblies, we're not going to cover that fully today, but through things called WebAssemblies, you can actually access hardware. And it also works offline, which is a huge advantage. And another huge advantage for a lot of people is the fact that you don't have to actually install these. So let's take a look at those benefits again in a little bit more detail. If you think about a web app, again, think your online banking app. This is very easy for people to reach. They just need to type in their URL and they will get into a website where they can interact with your data, whatever your app happens to be. On the other side over here, we have the native app. Now, a native app isn't as easy to install because you have to go to one of the app stores, or if it's on a computer, you might go to an app store, but you do need to install the software on your device, running some sort of installation program. Now, in many cases, that's fine, but in many other cases, people simply don't want to install apps. People might not want to install apps on their computer because they're afraid of virus concerns. They might not want to install apps on their phone, either for the same reason or more likely simply because they're running out of space. Or maybe it's something as simple as they don't remember their login for the Apple Store or for Google Play or something like that. So it isn't nearly as easy as simply going to a website. So this is where the PWA really combines the best of both worlds. It allows you to have the ease of accessing it simply by opening up a browser on any device and going to a particular URL, but it still has many of the benefits of the native device, including the ability to install an icon which launches it, and the ability for it to work offline and also potentially access hardware. So let's take a look about how you go about installing. So remember I said, well, you don't have to go to the App Store to install them. One cool thing you can do with your PWA is when someone gets to your website, here's 3 different views on 3 different devices. So let's take a mobile device, an Android device. You can have an option right here which says install, and they can click the button and it can do it. For the mobile IS, what they'll do is they click basically that share button, or the more button, I forget what it's actually called, and they just tap add to home screen, and it will add that PWA or the progressive web app to the home screen of the phone. And on a desktop browser, especially ones that are Chrome based, and that includes Edge, not just Chrome, there's a plus button that'll appear when you go to a URL that has got a progressive web app available. Now, when you click that, that actually can add the app onto your computer. As you can see here in this example, this has actually already been opened. And the next time you go there, you might see a little login, which tells you that you can go ahead and open that app in a browser. All right, so, whoops. Oh, I'll take that back. I was on the right screen after all. Hold on a second while I find my place. Okay, play from current slide. Here we go. So for example, once it's downloaded, here's the app as it appears on the screen of my actual computer right here. It's got an icon and all that, it's got a name. And when I click on it, I can launch it. Here's what it looks like when I launch it on my my Mac, or it look the same also if I launched it on a PC. And here's what it would look like on my iPhone over here. Now, one thing you've noticed is that there is no what we call Chrome. There are no controls up here at the top. So you don't have the back button, home, favorites, and all that other stuff, which is great because for an application, that stuff really is kind of clutter. That's stuff that you don't want. And in many cases, you don't want the user hitting the back button. After all, many times you're building what's called a single web page application. If they hit the back button, all it's going to do is leave the application and go to whatever website they were on before they entered your application. So that's not ideal. So one other cool thing about the progressive web app is that it can hide the Chrome around the window in which your application is being hosted. All right. So you can install these things. They have the benefits of a native app. You don't have to go through the App Store. They remove the Chrome. There's all kinds of cool stuff. So you're probably wondering, how do you go about building one of these? What is actually required to put together a PWA? Well, there are really just 4 things that you need for a PWA. The first is you need to have a server with SSL or TLS. In other words, you need to be able to connect to your page using an HTTPS connection as opposed to just HTTP. This will also work with localhost. So as you're testing locally, you don't have to have SSL. But once to implement it, you need to have SSL. Now, I showed maybe 2 months ago how to set up a server, how to set up SSL and all that. You might want to go back and take a look at it. I was using Amazon Web Services to host using a reverse proxy, kind of a cool little thing. So I've shown before how to set up a server. The next part is a start page, but that shouldn't be a surprise because every application that you build has a start page already. So far, the first 2 requirements are very much like any other web application. Now, the next 2 are not. You also need to have something called the web app manifest and something called a service worker. So what are these? Well, a web app manifest is a file, a JSON file, that gives information about your application. Mostly what it tells you about are the, and this is basically a file, a JSON file that is published to the same place as your start page. The next part is the service worker. The service worker is a type of what's called a web worker. It is a JavaScript that is running, or JavaScript script, I should call it, that's running in the background. In fact, a service worker can continue running even when you have closed the tab that the web page that it called it is on. The browser still needs to be open, or the app still needs to be open, but this will continue to work in the background. So this does all kinds of cool things. Cool thing number one is it lets you have a PWA in the first place, because without a service worker, you can't have a PWA. The second thing is that it can be used to do things like download large files in the background without interrupting the application as it's being used currently by the user. And another cool thing that it can do is it can receive and handle push notifications so that the server and the app can keep talking back to each other in the background without the user having to initiate anything. So that's very, very cool stuff that you can do with it. So what does a web app manifest and a service worker look like? Let me show you. Once you have created your file set, you're going to see two files, and these are created for me by Alpha Anywhere. I'm going to show you how that works in a moment. The first one is manifest.json, and the other one is sw.js. And SW, as you can probably imagine, stands for service worker. Well, let's take a look at the manifest file first. So in the manifest file, you'll see it gives you, there's some things here. This is, again, generated by Alpha Anywhere for us, but it gives us the name, or it lets the device know the name of our application. There's both a name and a short name. The short name, I believe, is used just on the icon, like on the home screen, where you don't have a lot of room, whereas the name would appear in the title bar of your application. Description, I have left blank, and I'm not sure where it shows up or even how it's used. But then, as you'll notice, the majority of the file is used basically specifying different icon sizes. And that's because this is a universal type of application. It needs to run on devices that have all different screen sizes. So icons need to be available starting at 72 by 72 pixels and incrementing up to 512 by 512 with some common sizes here in between. There's also a little bit of other information here at the bottom. There's the display. I'll talk about that in a minute. And the background color and the theme color. Not sure the theme color, but I'll show you what background color does, as well as a couple of other settings in a minute. Now let's take a look at the service worker. The service worker is a piece of JavaScript, and this piece of JavaScript is also generated for us by Alpha Anywhere, taking settings that we have in the IDE. So what it does, one of the key things that it has to do is set up what's called a listener event and an install event. These are two things that go into a service worker. But I'm not going to go in too much detail about the service worker, because even I don't actually know all of the qualifications that are needed behind it at the moment. So I'm not gonna speak above my head on this one, but just know this script needs to exist. It does need to have a couple of key elements, and Alpha Anywhere can generate these for you. All right. So how do we go ahead and create a PWA in Alpha Anywhere? Well, first of all, we start with like a UX component or some component. I believe this also works with a grid, but say a UX component. Maybe it just works with UXs. A few weeks ago, we did, or actually 2 months ago, we did a webinar in which I built a really simple application. And that application had a button on it, which was just a submit button. And when you click the submit button, an animation popped up. So I decided I'd use that same application again in this example, except this time I would turn it into a progressive web application so that I can install it on my devices and so that it'll work offline. So all I did was I went over to the web projects control panel and I clicked on or selected the animation example UX. And then up here, you see the PWA logo. I clicked on Create a Progressive Web Application. So far, pretty easy, right? All right. That opened up this property grid here. And at the bottom of the property grid, there's an OK button. When I click OK, it'll automatically create all of the files that I need and put them in a folder, a subfolder called PWA. And I can then take those and I can place them on an S3 bucket. I can put them on my Alpha Anywhere application server. I can really put them any place that's capable of serving up static HTML. Now, I say static because even though your HTML may do database interaction, it may API calls and stuff like that, the actual first load is actually static. It's all just JavaScript, HTML, and possibly WebAssembly. Again, talk about that one later. Let's take a look though at some of the settings though that you can adjust. So up here I have my app name and my short name. It just came from the UX that gets picked up automatically. For the short name, I may not have wanted to go with animation example. I may have just chosen example or something shorter like that because it didn't really fit nicely on the home screen. I noticed on my phone when I did it. So I'm going to say keep it to 10 letters or something like that. The description, it's a field here. I'm not sure where it's used, to be honest with you. The static cache name, I would leave these alone. These are basically just indicating to the progressive web app where it will find its data. The dynamic version for static and dynamic. These are interesting, and I really have to do a research as to what the difference is between the two. But in general, I can tell you that when you make an update to your application, you're going to want to bump those numbers. And you'll do that just by clicking these hyperlinks down here. It'll just add this. This would become a 101.2. And if I clicked the dynamic one, it would bump it to 101.2 here as well. When you bump it, the next time someone opens up your progressive web application, it's going to update itself to that new version. So that's what's kind of cool. When it opens up, if it sees that the dynamic version number or the other static version number is unchanged, then it knows it does not need to update and it'll just leave it alone. Okay, so those are useful when you're making updates and you want to push those updates out. The next thing you want to take a look at is the URL for AJAX callbacks. Now, in my example, I don't have any AJAX callbacks. I don't have a database. I don't have a backend database. So it's really not a great example. But most of the time, you probably will be. So if that's the case, you're going to want to tell Alpha where your Alpha server is located so that it can make callbacks to your XBasic code that you may have defined for your UX. In my case, I didn't bother with this, but I know that it does need to be specified or it's just simply not going to work. The last one here, well, actually, there's three more I want to cover, but this one here, the master icon, basically you want to give it an image that I think is 512 by 512. And what Alpha will do is will automatically create all those smaller versions of the icons for you and place them in a folder, and they'll be available for your progressive web app so that the correct size loads on the correct device. Next, we have standalone as the display option. I'm in PowerPoint right now. Let me just go right into Live Alpha Anywhere for this one. Under display type, we have standalone. Now, if you remember, I told you that when a progressive web app is running, it often is running Chromeless. There's no back button, home favorites, and stuff like that. You may, for some reason, wish to enable browser functionality, in which case the display option you could set to browser. There's also minimal AI, which has even fewer controls at the top than simply standalone. And then we have full screen, which takes over the full screen, as you can imagine. Now, full screen standalone is full screen when you're running it on a mobile device, but it isn't necessarily full screen when you're running it on a desktop device. And remember, a progressive web application can run on both. The next thing is the theme color. If you remember from the previous slides, the top of my windows were all red, where it said application or animation example. That's where you actually set this, is right here. It doesn't have to be red. It can be any color you like. Background color, at this moment, I don't know where it's used, so I'm not really gonna talk about that. And then you could decide what you want to do at the end. So remember I talked about publishing this like to an S3 bucket? That's actually one of the options here. So after it builds the file sets, when I click OK, I can tell it that I'd like it to go to my S3 bucket. Of course, I'd have to set up a storage connection string, which we can talk about separately, in order to do that. But it's just a convenient way to have that done. The other thing is it could just open up the folder in it, and then it'd be up to you where you're gonna put those files. All right. When that's done and I clicked OK, I just simply took that file set and I pasted it into my project. So let's go ahead and, actually, I don't think I've ever opened it here in this browser. Let's open up Edge and let's go take a look at my application. So the URL to get there, and you can do this too at home if you like, is goofcanoe.com / what is it called? index.html. This is going to be an HTTPS because it is a progressive web app and that is required. So let me click OK. This was working just before I got on, so we'll see if it's working today. There it is, wonderful. Now, if you can see, take a look at this window, something exciting has happened. It says app available. See this? App available. Install the animation example. I sure do. I want to install that. So let's install it right now. Faster load times, quick access, additional Windows features, plus, best of all, it also works offline. So I'm going to go ahead and install that. And now it's been installed and it is running. Do I want to pin it to the start menu or the taskbar? Sure, why not? Create a desktop shortcut? Fine. Start it when no, I'm not. That's gone a little too far. All right, let me close down Edge. It's not my favorite browser. All right, and you'll see that my application is running. And if I click the submit button, it does what it's supposed to. It runs my little animation. So that is the crash course of Alpha Anywhere and progressive web applications for newbies. And I hope that you guys have found that helpful. Are there any questions? Or are there any questions on anything else? I'll give you guys a minute. Okay, here we go. Do users need special permissions to install? Nope, I believe you just have to, unlike a regular application, I don't think that you need to be, in fact, I know you don't because I have user authorization control on my Windows machine. And a moment ago, if I tried to install a regular application, it would have said, hey, you need permissions. Do you want to log in as the administrator? It looks like it certainly isn't needed in Windows. I don't think you really need it on anything else because they are rather safe applications. They are sandboxed pretty well. Does this work in Firefox? Oh, I'm so glad someone brought that up. The answer is no. Firefox, for whatever reason, is the one browser that does not support progressive web applications. They might at some point, and they started to, but somewhere around 2020, they gave up. And they said it's not. They said it's probably not coming anytime soon. So I'm not really sure about that. Next question: at what build did the progressive web application feature become available? Well, it became available. I think the first time was during last week's build. It stopped being hidden behind a feature key and became a thing that's now in our stable release of Alpha Anywhere. So it is now a feature that you can use right now. It's been around for about a week. Now, the technology itself, 2018-ish, I guess, is when they started working on it. Maybe as far back as 2015, somewhere in that range. But it wasn't really being supported. The notion of the manifest and the service workers and so on weren't really being supported by most browsers until maybe a year or two ago. So this is still pretty new stuff. But right now, except for Firefox users, now's a good time to get into the progressive web applications. Does security work the same? Yep, it works exactly the same. Of course, once you're offline, whatever did load before is probably still loaded kind of like it is in the browser, but you still would need, for example, if you had to callbacks or you had a login screen or something like that, and you had connection to the server, it would let you in, and if it didn't, of course, it wouldn't let you in. So yeah, that's all possible. Someone said, I got a different page. Yeah, the reason you got a different page is you probably typed in index.a5w instead of index. HTML. So I actually got two home pages. The default one is the one which will say Bob's Bikes, but if you log in with index.html, it should let you in. You skipped over Firestore GitHub options. Any guess when guidance will be available? So for Firestore, absolutely take a look at the at what Bob has done. Also take a look at the release notes. We have done some documentation on that. GitHub, I'm not sure, but I'm going to write that down right now and see how quickly we can get documentation out to explain how that works. So that's a really good one. And how long? I don't know, a week or two. Shouldn't take longer than that. It's a new feature. It's just being we're just wrapping up doc now for it. Is there a new stable alpha web app build? I think you mean Alpha Anywhere, in which case, yes, there is a new one. In fact, there's a new one this week and there's a new one yesterday. So you go ahead and download it if you like. Did I say that the browser application must be HTTPS? Yes, that is the case. You cannot do it with a non-encrypted thing. The browser simply won't let you do it. It's part of the specification of the standard for progressive web apps. So you do have to have an SSL certificate. It really, you should have them anyway. I mean, there's almost no reason to. You can get them for free at this point. So, it's just good practice. Alpha launch PWAs, and someone mentioned another one on the horizon. What is the name besides Alpha launch? I don't remember what the next thing is. Alpha launch, of course, is that application that lets you run your applications inside of it. And Alpha launch itself is available in the web stores. You can find it for Android and you can find it for iOS. I don't know what the third one was that someone mentioned offhand, but go take a look at the webinar link. Let's see if we have anything else here. Looks like it. Wonderful. Hey, everyone. Thank you very much for showing up. Always love having you guys here. We're not going to be doing a webinar next week because it is the Thanksgiving holiday or the day before it here in the United States, but we will be back the week after. In the meantime, you can send those questions into guides, GUIDES @alphasoftware.com. I hope you guys have a great 2 weeks. Take care. Stay well. Bye-bye.